There's a part of the internet you were never meant to see, not because it's hidden behind passwords, but because what lives there isn't meant for normal people. No rules, no identities, no mercy. A place where criminals don't just hide, they gather. Where hackers trade weapons made of code. Where entire communities exist in complete darkness, untouched by law. Most people think it's just a myth, an urban legend created to scare curious minds away. But it's real. And tonight, you're about to see some of the most disturbing secrets ever discovered inside the dark web. These are not stories meant to entertain. These are warnings. Because once you understand what's hiding in the dark, you can't unsee it. Most people use the internet every day without ever thinking about what lies beneath it. Social media, videos, news, games. It all feels open, familiar, and safe. But beneath that surface exists another layer. A hidden network designed for anonymity. A place where identities disappear and actions leave almost no trace. This is what people call the dark web. And while it does have legitimate uses, it has also become a refuge for some of the most disturbing communities ever discovered online. In 2019, investigators became aware of a hidden website operating through encrypted networks. At first glance, it looked like a normal media sharing platform. It had categories, user profiles, and discussion boards. But it wasn't normal. This site wasn't built for entertainment. It was built for secrecy. Users didn't join casually. Entry required careful vetting. New members had to prove themselves trustworthy to gain access. Communication often began on normal platforms before moving deeper into encrypted channels. Trust was everything. Once inside, members communicated openly, protected by layers of anonymity. They shared files, conversations, and information without fear of immediate identification. What made this site particularly dangerous wasn't just the content. It was the structure. This wasn't random individuals acting alone. It was an organized network. People encouraging each other, supporting each other, strengthening the community. Experts have long warned about the dangers of anonymous networks, enabling harmful individuals to find one another. Technology had given them something powerful, connection, and connection made them harder to stop. Over time, the platform grew rapidly. Thousands of users joined. Activity increased. The site became more organized, more secure, and more difficult to trace. Whoever built it understood exactly how to stay hidden. Security measures were strict. Users avoided revealing personal details. Communication was encrypted. Every step was designed to avoid detection. To outsiders, it didn't exist. But law enforcement had begun to notice. Investigators knew something was there. They just didn't know how deep it went. And what they would eventually discover would reveal a truth far more disturbing than anyone expected. Because hidden behind layers of encryption, this wasn't just a website. It was a community that refused to disappear. And shutting it down would prove far more difficult than anyone imagined. But what investigators discovered next changed everything. Because this wasn't just a hidden website. Someone had built it to be nearly impossible to trace. And the person behind it may have been far more powerful than anyone expected. For months, the website remained hidden in plain sight. To the outside world, it didn't exist. No search engine could find it. No public link led to it. And anyone who wasn't invited would never even know where to look. But eventually, something changed. Investigators in Europe began noticing patterns. Small clues buried in unrelated cases. Fragment of digital evidence that pointed towards something larger, something organized. At first, it didn't make sense. But piece by piece, the fragments began connecting. Authorities realized they weren't dealing with isolated individuals anymore. They were dealing with a network. Law enforcement agencies quietly launched an undercover operation. Their goal wasn't just to shut down the website. They needed to understand how it worked, who controlled it, and how far it reached. This meant entering the darkness themselves. Investigators created fake identities and slowly worked their way inward. It wasn't fast. Trust inside the network was earned carefully. Every new member was treated with suspicion. One mistake could expose them, and exposure meant failure. So they waited, they observed, they listened. Over time, they began identifying key figures inside the community. Certain users stood out. They were more active, more trusted, more influential. These weren't just participants. These were leaders, the administrators, the people who built the system and kept it running. But identifying them wasn't enough. The real challenge was finding them in the real world, because the dark web was designed for one purpose above all else: anonymity. Every user's identity was hidden behind layers of encryption. Their locations were masked. Their activity routed through multiple servers across different countries. Tracking them was like trying to follow a shadow through fog. But investigators had one advantage: time. Instead of rushing, they studied patterns, login times, communication habits, behavioral clues. Even the smallest inconsistency could reveal something. And eventually, something did. Tiny digital traces, mistakes, so small most users would never notice them. But for trained investigators, they were enough. By analyzing how data moved through the network, they began tracing pathways back to their source. Each message passed through multiple encrypted points called nodes, and while the content remained hidden, the path itself left faint fingerprints, like footprints in fresh snow. Slowly, carefully, investigators followed those footprints, and what they found shocked them, because the people behind the website weren't who they expected. They weren't anonymous ghosts hiding in basements. They were real people, living normal lives, blending into society, and some of them held positions no one would ever suspect. The investigation had uncovered something far bigger than a hidden website. It had uncovered the beginning of something far more dangerous. And now that investigators were close, there was no turning back. But just as authorities prepared to make their move, they discovered something terrifying. Someone inside the network already knew they were being watched, and what happened next would expose secrets no one was prepared for. After months of silent observation, investigators were finally getting closer. The hidden network that once seemed untouchable was beginning to crack. Patterns had been identified, activity had been mapped, and slowly, the anonymous figures behind the system were turning into real suspects. But what investigators discovered next was even more disturbing than the site itself. The people running the network weren't careless amateurs. They were experienced, calculated, patient. Every part of the system had been designed with protection in mind. Communication was encrypted. Access was restricted. Even internal members didn't fully know each other's identities. It was a structure built on secrecy, and whoever created it understood digital security at an advanced level. This wasn't random. This was intentional. Investigators noticed that certain accounts had far more control than others. These users weren't just participants. They managed access, organized discussions, and enforced strict internal rules. They were the administrators, the backbone of the entire operation. Tracking them became the top priority. Using advanced cyber forensic techniques, investigators began analyzing how information flowed through the network. While encryption protected the content, it couldn't completely hide timing, behavior, and connection patterns. Every login left a trace. Every message created movement. And over time, those movements formed a map. That map pointed toward multiple individuals located in different countries, men living ordinary lives. Some had jobs, families, responsibilities. On the surface, they appeared completely normal. But behind their screens, they controlled one of the darkest networks investigators had ever encountered. Eventually, authorities identified several key suspects believed to be responsible for operating and maintaining the site. This was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. Plans were made quickly, but carefully. Arrests couldn't happen too soon. Investigators needed enough evidence to ensure the network would collapse completely. If even one administrator escaped, the system could be rebuilt. And that was the real danger. Because this wasn't just a website. It was an idea, a community. And ideas don't disappear easily. Finally, after years of careful investigation, authorities moved in. Multiple suspects were arrested across different locations. Their devices were seized. Their identities confirmed. The hidden network had finally been exposed. Or at least, that's what everyone thought. Because within hours of the shutdown, something unexpected happened. The website didn't disappear completely. Instead, copies of its data began appearing elsewhere. Someone had prepared for this. Someone had backed up everything, which meant one terrifying truth. The network was never meant to die. It was meant to survive. And whoever had preserved it was still out there, watching, waiting, ready to rebuild. But while authorities were fighting to contain the network, another threat was already spreading across the world. This one didn't hide in secret communities. It attacked hospitals, governments, entire countries. It began with just a few lines of stolen code. While authorities were still dealing with hidden networks in the shadows, another threat was quietly preparing to strike. This one didn't rely on secret communities. It relied on code. Somewhere in the world, a group of hackers had gained access to something extremely dangerous. Not money, not personal data, but weapons, digital weapons. These tools had originally been developed for surveillance and cyber warfare. They were designed to infiltrate computer systems silently, bypass security, and maintain control without being detected. In the wrong hands, they could become catastrophic. And that's exactly what happened. In 2017, hackers released a powerful piece of ransomware into the wild. Once inside a computer, it locked every file, every document, and every system function. Then it displayed a message: pay the ransom or lose everything. At first, only a few machines were affected, but this wasn't an ordinary virus. It spread on its own. Every vulnerable computer it found became another launch point. From there, it moved to connected systems, infecting entire networks within minutes. Hospitals were among the first major victims. Doctors arrived at work to find their computers locked. Patient records were inaccessible. Critical systems stopped functioning. Without access to digital tools, medical staff were forced to rely on paper and guesswork. Appointments were canceled. Treatments were delayed. Lives were put at risk. But the attack didn't stop there. Banks, transportation systems, businesses, and government offices began reporting the same issue. Screens turned red. Files vanished. Systems froze. Within hours, the attack had spread across multiple countries. Entire organizations were paralyzed. In some places, train systems shut down. In others, Companies were forced to halt operations completely. The virus moved faster than anyone expected. Security experts raced to find a solution. Governments issued emergency warnings. Companies shut down their networks to prevent further damage. But the infection continued spreading. It was global. Hundreds of thousands of computers were affected, and no one knew how to stop it. The attackers had created something unstoppable. Or at least, that's what it seemed. Because hidden within the virus was something its creators never expected anyone to find. A flaw. A single weakness buried deep in the code. And the person who discovered it wasn't part of any government. He was just one cybersecurity researcher working alone. What he found would change everything. What this researcher discovered didn't just stop the virus. It may have prevented a global collapse. Because if the attack had continued, the damage could have been far worse than anyone imagined. As the ransomware continued spreading across the globe, panic was growing. Every minute, more systems were infected. Hospitals couldn't access patient records. Businesses lost control of their operations. Governments struggled to maintain basic services. The virus didn't care who you were. If your system was vulnerable, it took control. Cybersecurity teams worked nonstop, analyzing the malware, searching for any weakness. But the code was complex, carefully designed, built to spread fast and resist interference. It felt unstoppable, until one person noticed something strange. A young cybersecurity researcher was studying the virus in a controlled environment. He wasn't part of a government agency. He wasn't backed by a major corporation. He was just curious. As he examined the ransomware's behavior, he saw something unusual. Every time the virus infected a new computer, it attempted to connect to a specific web address. But that address didn't exist. It was just a random string of letters and numbers. At first, it didn't make sense. Why would a virus try to contact a dead website? Curious, he decided to register the domain himself. It cost him less than the price of a meal. And the moment he activated it, something incredible happened. The spread stopped. Almost instantly, across the world, the virus began slowing down. New infections dropped. Systems that would have been compromised were suddenly safe. Without realizing it, he had triggered what experts later called the kill switch, a hidden safety check built into the virus's code. No one knows why the creators included it. Maybe it was a testing mechanism. Maybe it was an oversight. But that single discovery changed everything. What could have become one of the most devastating cyber disasters in history was stopped by one unexpected action. Still, the damage was enormous. Hundreds of thousands of computers had already been infected. Businesses lost billions. Critical infrastructure was disrupted. Entire organizations were forced to rebuild their systems from scratch. And the people responsible were never fully caught. They vanished back into the shadows. Hidden, anonymous, waiting, because the dark web never truly disappears. It evolves. The networks may fall. The viruses may stop. But the people behind them remain. Somewhere behind screens. Watching, learning, preparing. And the most terrifying part of all is that the next attack could already be in motion.